Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating deep dive into something that, well, most of us do every single day without even giving it a second thought: listening to music. I mean, we pop in our earbuds, hit play, and just let the melodies wash over us, right? We treat it as completely harmless background noise. But what if it isn't? What if what we consider just, benign entertainment is actually functioning as a deeply manipulative, silent weapon? Our source material today brings together modern neuroscience and 1400-year-old Islamic theology. And together, they present this totally startling diagnosis of how computer-generated beats and melodies affect our brain's dopamine pathways and ultimately our spiritual well-being. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for mapping the mind and soul today. We'll start with the silent weapon, followed by your brain on music and the spiritual toll. Then we'll hit science meets spirituality, and finally wrap things up with the path to recovery. Section 1. The silent weapon. So we really need to set the premise here. We have to ask, is music just harmless entertainment? I mean, think about your own life for a second. Have you ever noticed how a certain song can instantly make you feel super aggressive or maybe deeply melancholy or even artificially energized? In the modern world, music is literally everywhere. It's in our cars, our gyms, the grocery store, but the source material suggests something pretty heavy. This constant, inescapable exposure actually allows external frequencies to fly right under the radar and subtly dictate our emotional control and our focus. Section 2. Your brain on music. To truly get a grip on this, we've kind of got to strip away all the cultural romance surrounding music and just look at the hard medical science. And the science? It is staggering. Research confirms that music triggers the exact same neurological pathways as heavy drugs. When you listen to a song you absolutely love, your brain experiences a massive dopamine flood. Specifically, it hits two areas, the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA. These are your brain's core reward centers. And here's the crazy part. These are the exact same pathways activated by cocaine, nicotine, and gambling. Basically, your brain chemically processes a heavy bass line or a super catchy chorus using the very same biological machinery it uses for highly addictive behaviors. And that brings us to a pretty harsh reality. Music is basically creating an illusion of pleasure. It gives the brain this fake high. Sure, in the moment, it might feel like it's reducing your stress, but the source details how this is actually just emotional manipulation. By handing over your emotional control to an external track, you're essentially hacking your own system. Aggressive music forces this totally unnatural adrenaline rush, which leaves you restless and angry. Sad music, it triggers depressive hormones. And over time, your brain builds a tolerance. It creates a literal dependency on these artificial spikes just to feel normal. Section 3. The spiritual toll. All right, so now we're transitioning from the cold, hard lens of modern nerve science to the equally rigorous diagnostic lens of Islamic theology. The source material outlines how these texts treat the spiritual impact of music with serious analytical depth. And look, we aren't here to take sides. We're just here to clearly explain what these 1400-year-old texts diagnose as the root of the problem. At the very core of this diagnosis is a concept called nifaq, which translates to hypocrisy. But in Islamic spiritual terms, we're not just talking about telling a lie. It's considered this profound spiritual sickness. It's a fundamental disconnect between your outward appearance and your inner spiritual reality. The text suggests that constant exposure to music actually hardens the human heart, effectively building this invisible wall that distances a person from spiritual remembrance and a real, authentic connection to their creator. Now, there is immense weight given to one specific hadith, which is a recorded saying of the Prophet Muhammad. It reads, "Music grows hypocrisy in the heart, just as water grows grass." Think about that for a second. It's a really powerful, active metaphor. It's asserting that music isn't just some passive background experience, it is an active cultivator. Just like you literally can't stop grass from growing when you pour water on it, the source argues that you cannot stop the spiritual sickness of hypocrisy from taking root in your heart when it's constantly being watered by music. This diagnosis goes even deeper. It's rooted in the Quranic text itself through the term lahu al-hadith, which translates to idle talk or vain discourses. In Surah Luqman, ayat 6, this term is specifically identified as something people purchase to mislead others from the path of Allah without knowledge. And the source text points out something fascinating here. Prominent early scholars and companions of the Prophet, like Abdullah bin Masud, explicitly swore oaths, stating that lahu al-hadith in this specific verse refers directly to singing and music. Section 4. Science meets spirituality. Now, what's really interesting about this next part, and this is basically the climax of our explainer, is how these two seemingly different worlds collide. Up until now, we've looked at the biology and the theology as separate tracks, but when we put them side by side, the convergence is honestly mind-blowing. In the scientific reality, music causes an artificial high and dependency. In the spiritual reality, according to Islam, it creates a ghafal, or heedless heart that amplifies unchecked desires. Science shows that after the music stops, you get a dopamine crash, right? You feel restless. What's the spiritual equivalent? A loss of inner peace and the active growth of that nifaq, or hypocrisy we talked about. And finally, psychology talks about earworms, those catchy lyrics constantly stuck in your head that totally wreck your cognitive focus. The theological text identifies this exact same phenomenon as ruining khushu, which is that deep, meditative focus you need for prayers and reciting the Quran. So you have two entirely different disciplines separated by centuries, arriving at the exact same conclusion about the human condition. Section 5. The Path to Recovery. So, if the diagnosis is this clear across both science and spirituality, what exactly is the cure? Well, based on the source material, there's a highly practical 4-step recovery roadmap to break this habit loop. Escaping this dependency is totally possible. You just have to approach it systematically. We've got the replacement theory, trigger identification, a structured dopamine detox, and finally, using specific spiritual tools like istighfar and dua. Let's walk through these. Step 1 is the replacement theory. Now, here's a fundamental rule of human psychology. The brain absolutely hates a vacuum. If you just try to delete music from your life cold turkey with no backup plan, the sheer silence is going to drive your dopamine-starved brain crazy. You have to proactively replace that artificial high with something else. The source heavily recommends substituting music with the beautiful recitation of the Quran, which provides true sakina, meaning authentic, deep peace, rather than just a fake dopamine spike. But if you aren't listening to that, fill that empty space with informative podcasts, engaging audiobooks, or even just soothing nature sounds like rain or birds. And that leads right into step 2, trigger identification. You've got to know when you are most vulnerable. For most of us, the really common triggers are hopping into the car for a long commute, throwing on headphones at the gym, or just sitting alone in your room. The whole strategy here is preemption. You literally need to have your replacement audio, your audiobook, your podcast, your Quranic recitation already queued up and ready to hit play during those specific moments. Do not give your brain that idle 5-second window it takes to suddenly crave a song. Step 3 is the dopamine detox. And I want you to notice the critical timeline here. 14 days. Quitting a heavily dopamine-driven habit brings actual physiological withdrawal symptoms. The source notes that for those first few days, your brain is going to crave that musical stimulation intensely. But if you can maintain strict avoidance, it takes roughly 2 weeks, about 14 days, for your brain's dopamine baseline to finally normalize. Once you cross that 14-day threshold, that constant nagging restlessness fades away, and you actually start finding comfort and genuine peace in normal, everyday silence again. Finally, step 4 is all about your spiritual safety nets. When a really sudden, intense urge hits out of nowhere, the source advises seeking active spiritual strength to fight it off. This involves istighfar, which is actively seeking forgiveness, physically resetting your state by performing wuzu or ablution and reciting A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, which is a specific prayer seeking refuge from negative spiritual influences. Really, it's about consciously asking the Creator for the strength that your own personal willpower might be lacking in that specific moment. Which brings us to the end of our analysis today, and I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Will you let a silent weapon control your mind and soul? We've looked at the modern brain scans, we've explored the ancient texts, and we've mapped out those undeniable, striking similarities between a biological dopamine crash and spiritual restlessness. The biggest takeaway from our source material today is that true, lasting peace simply isn't found in chasing an artificial, computer-generated high. Authentic connection, focus, and clarity, they require us to step out of the noise. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive has given you a powerful new perspective on the soundtrack of your daily life.